According to the cloud, and an official good evening to everyone. Welcome to the September session of the MRBO monthly webinar series. My name is Dana Ripper with the Missouri River Bird Observatory, and Ethan Duke from MRBO is also here with us tonight. Our mission is the conservation of birds and all wildlife through science, education, and advocacy. And this that you're with us tonight is sort of part of our education work where we discuss current issues of conservation concern, science, research, and all kinds of different opportunities. We have just finished scheduling our November and December webinars. So just to remind folks of what's upcoming, you'll get it by email as well. But in October, Dr. John Riley is going to join us speaking from Virginia on cats and native wildlife. In November, we have Tara Homan of National Audubon Society and Audubon Upper Mississippi River speaking to us about Audubon's expanding work here in the state of Missouri. And then in December, Mr. Bill White, he is now of the Conservation Federation of Missouri and the Missouri Native Grasslands Council, on farm bill programs and teaching us about conservation through farm bill programs. So as soon as I'm done talking, I'm going to throw those links to register for those webinars into the chat so you can access them easily. And now our webinar for this evening, Leah is joining us with some awesome information on insects and her research here in Missouri. Leah Gastonguey is a fourth-year PhD student in the Department of Plant Sciences at the University of Missouri. Her research focuses on the roles insects play on farms and how we might provide habitat for beneficial insects to increase the environmental health and quality of our agricultural ecosystems. So some really important and timely information. Leah, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Dana, for the introduction and for having me as the September webinar speaker. And thanks to everybody who's joined that's listening in on a Monday evening to learn about insects and my research. I really appreciate you, and I hope you're able to learn something. So like Dana said, I'm a fourth-year PhD student, and I'm currently at the University of Missouri in the Department of Plant Sciences, and I belong to the Finke Lab. So in the top right corner is a picture of my advisor and I, Dr. Debbie Finke, and my lab. And we do a lot of research that asks questions about how insects respond to habitat loss, agricultural practices, and environmental changes. And we work with a broad range of insects, including bumblebees, native Missouri bees, like solitary bees, like pollinating flies, monarchs, butterflies, moths, kind of just like a wide range of insects. Um, and just first and foremost, I want to talk about why insect research is important and why we should care about insects. And I don't think I have to do too much convincing to this group to get you to agree with me that insects are important. If you see the value in birds, you hopefully will see the value in insects. But insects are just incredibly diverse and abundant. They're actually the most diverse and abundant animal in the world. Um, and I've added these pictures here. Most of them have been taken by my lab mates, but just to show you like how beautiful they can be and how cool they are. Um, and not only that, they're extremely important for our ecosystems, and without them, our ecosystems would collapse. So insects tend to get a bad reputation, but out of the 1.5 million species that we've identified, the majority of them are actually beneficial or completely harmless to humans. On the right, I have just a few beneficial insects. Um, and when we talk about beneficial insects, we're talking about insects that provide ecosystem services. So, an ecosystem service is a beneficial function that's provided by some part of our environment. So, for example, trees provide air filtration ecosystem services, birds provide pest control ecosystem services, and insects provide a lot of different types of ecosystem services. And they're actually valued at $57 billion per year in the United States. I think this is a little bit of a low number. I think they're worth a lot more, but that's what we could quantify. Um, so there's a lot of value in insects too. I wanted to talk to you about some of the insect ecosystem services. So One is nutrient cycling and decomposition. So insects like termites provide decomposition ecosystem services of wood, and insects like dung beetle decompose poop, and we also have insects that decompose decaying matter. These insects are just getting those nutrients back into the environment, which is really important. We also have insects that provide water filtration ecosystem services. So there's insects like caddisflies that are actually indicators of healthy waterways. Caddisflies build these really beautiful nets that capture particulate matter as it's flowing through water. And so if we have these in our waterways, we know that, there's at least some healthy part of that water. There's also other groups of insects that we used that are bioindicators of healthy water. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the pollination ecosystem service that insects provide. When we think about pollination, we tend to think about honeybees, but there are so many other native insects that provide pollination services, like moths, beetles, wasps, bees, flies, butterflies. Um, and it's estimated that about 35% of our food crops rely on insect pollination. And that means that these crops are receiving increased fruit set or increased fruit production or fruit weight. So if you ate today, you can thank a pollinator. There's also insects that provide pest control ecosystem services, and we often refer to these insects as biological control agents or natural enemies. And natural enemies include things like predators and parasitoids. So, insect predators are insects that eat pest insects. For example, I have a picture of a lady beetle here eating aphids, which are very common pests of food crops and like houseplants. Um, Lady beetles are voracious predators of aphids. They're great natural enemies. And then on the bottom, I have a picture of a parasitoid wasp, which is maybe a little bit underappreciated as a natural enemy. Parasitoids, the way that they work is that they lay their eggs in the insect host, and the eggs develop, feed on that host, and then eventually emerge, and the cycle kind of continues. And parasitoids have a really great ability to detect their hosts in any kind of environment. So they're really effective natural enemies against pests. And both predators and parasitoids offer farmers and gardeners non-chemical methods of pest control. And this is a really big deal. This can help reduce the amount of pesticides that we need to use and the amount of pest damage that we're seeing on our crops. And then we also have insects that provide weed control ecosystem services. Insects like ants and ground beetles both eat weed seeds, and they're so efficient at it that there's actually research to show that they can remove up to 80 to 90% of weed seeds, like the current season's input of weed seeds from the seed bank. So in areas where we maybe don't want a ton of weeds, like in agricultural ecosystems or maybe in your garden, it's really great to have these present. And then insects are just a vital part of the food web. Animals like birds, bats, fish, frogs eat insects. And so we kind of indirectly rely on insects that way. Um, I wanted to include a bird fact since this is the Missouri River Bird Observatory webinar. So about 61% of United States birds rely on insects solely for nutrition. And then I think about another 28% of birds at least partially rely on insects for nutrition. So if we didn't have insects, we wouldn't have birds, and that would just be sad. So it's really clear that insects are super important and they're really necessary for healthy ecosystems. But insect biomass is declining. A paper published in 2017 found that in the previous 27 years, insect biomass had declined by about 75%, which is really a big deal. That was due to a lot of things like urbanization, the overuse of insecticides, and agricultural intensification. And that's what I want to talk about today. So this picture is very dramatic, but what it's trying to portray is that intensive agriculture that uses monoculture crops, tillage, and chemical pest control simplifies the landscape and provides no resources for beneficial insects. But there are ways that we can make our farming environments more eco-friendly and more insect-friendly. And one of those methods is through the incorporation of flowering companion plants or flowering non-crop plants that are just there to provide resources for beneficial insects. And this is really helpful because it can increase the amount of insect pollination and biological pest control that our crops are receiving. And it can kind of improve overall farm health and productivity. So one method, like I mentioned, that we can use to increase farm biodiversity is companion planting. And that's when you specifically grow flowering plants alongside your crops to provide food and habitat and nectar resources for beneficial insects. So I have this picture of this companion planting of Sweet Alyssum that's just straight down this huge field of brassica. Um, there's evidence to show that companion plants do work in increasing pollination and contributing to long-term suppression of pests on our food crops. So that's kind of where my research comes in. Over the last 4 years, I've been really interested in understanding how farm biodiversity affects beneficial insects and beneficial insect ecosystem services. And I've done this research in commodity crop systems like soybean farms and also in specialty crop systems like with peppers. And today I'm just going to talk about my pepper research because I don't think we have time for the soybean research. And I think the pepper research is super fun. So, okay. So for the pepper project, what I was curious to know was if we could use companion planting to attract a type of beneficial insect called a syrphid fly to pepper plants for optimal pollination and pest control ecosystem services. So let's break this down. Syrphid flies are an example of an insect that we'd really want in our agricultural ecosystems, and that's because they have the potential to provide two very important ecosystem roles. The first is pest control by their larvae. So this is a picture on the left of a syrphid fly larva. They look really weird, but it's eating an aphid. They're voracious predators of aphids and other kind of like fleshy crop pests like mites and thrips and things like that. So they're really good to have around for that reason. And then also the adults are pollinators because they feed on nectar and pollen, spreading pollen around. So because they both, because syrphid flies offer two really important ecosystem services at two separate stages in their life, we call them dual ecosystem servicers. And they are great to have around on our farms. And syrphid flies are actually really abundant and pretty common. I guarantee that everyone has seen one of these before, and they might have just thought it was a wasp or a bee. But they just pretend to be bees. They don't sting or bite. And I'm hoping to show you this video. Let's see here. So syrphid flies get the nickname hoverfly because they fly like this. And they're thought to be one of the best flyers in the animal kingdom next to hummingbirds. So I think that's pretty cool. All right, let's see. Okay, so my questions for this research were first, do companion plants actually work in increasing syrphid fly pollination ecosystem services on pepper plants? But in order to ask this question, I first needed to know if companion plants even worked in attracting syrphid flies to pepper plants. Because it might be that we're growing these companion plants alongside our peppers, and they're not really doing anything, and they're not bringing in syrphid flies. But if they are bringing in syrphid flies, is that actually leading to more pollination and increasing our pepper yields? So The reason why I chose bell peppers is because of a paper that was published in 1997 that found that syrphid fly pollination of pepper plants increased pepper seed set, which is a measure of plant fitness. And this was the only paper I could find that directly measured syrphid fly pollination of food crop. Um, in general, syrphid flies are pretty understudied, and we'll talk about that more later. Um, Another reason why I chose peppers was because they're the second most common specialty crop grown in Missouri, right after tomatoes. And so understanding how to optimize, pollination and pest control on pepper plants has huge implications for Missouri farmers and for consumers. And then I chose the Cupid mini bell pepper variety from Johnny's. You can buy these online if you want, because I thought they were very cute. And also, they're pretty easy to grow and seem to be well defended against pests. So it just worked for this research. And then for the companion plants for this project, I chose sunhemp, sweet alyssum, and buckwheat. And the reason why I picked these three plants was because yellow or white flowers are thought to be attractive to syrphid flies, and because farmers sometimes use these plants to increase biodiversity on their land. So it kind of had implications there as well. These are plants that farmers could buy seed for easily and plant easily. Um, but it is important to note that none of these plants are native. I tried using native plants for this project, and I just couldn't get anything to germinate well enough to be able to use it for research. But I always advocate for using native, just prioritizing that. But for this project, these plants work the best. So, all right. So that first question was whether companion plants could increase syrphid fly pollination services to the pepper plants. And to ask this question, in the summer of 2022, we had an experiment at South Farm, which is just in south of Columbia. Um, and it consisted of pots of pepper plants grown around different combinations of those companion plants. So one of our treatments was a monoculture treatment where a pot of pepper plants was surrounded by just one species of companion plant. And we had those treatments for each companion plant species. So we had a pot of pepper plants surrounded by sweet alyssum, a pot of pepper plants surrounded by just sun hemp, and then a potted pepper plant surrounded by all buckwheat. And then we also had a polyculture treatment that consisted of a pot of peppers surrounded by all three species of companion plant. And then we just had a pot of peppers standing alone, in the absence of any companion plants. And next to each cluster of plants was a potted pepper plant covered with mesh to exclude pollinators from visiting the pepper flowers. And this allowed us to ask questions about how insect pollination affects pepper yield. We replicated this treatment 5 times, and then we conducted observations of these clusters where we were basically standing 3 feet away from the plants, watching them for 2 minutes, and recording any kind of insect visitation that we saw on the pepper plants or the companion plants. And we did this twice a week for 7 weeks. And then at the end of the season, we collected all of the peppers off the plants to understand how fruit production varied between the companion plant treatments. All right, so to answer our question about whether companion plants actually increase syrphid fly visitation to pepper plants, we found that actually companion plants did work. So the polyculture treatments that had all three species of companion plant seemed to be the most attractive to syrphid flies. We had the highest number of syrphid fly visitation to the pepper flowers in the treatments with all three companion plants. And this was great. This told us that companion plant diversity is really important. And from this graph, we might conclude that the monoculture treatments don't really work in attracting syrphid flies to the peppers, but we actually found that syrphid flies seem to really prefer buckwheat over sweet alyssum or sun hemp. From this graph, you can see that the buckwheat monoculture treatments where the pepper was just surrounded by buckwheat, it wasn't really different in the number of syrphid fly visitations to the peppers than in the polyculture treatment, where we had all 3 species of companion plant. So this tells us that companion plant identity is really important when we're trying to build plantings on farms or in gardens to attract beneficial insects. There might just be some plants that certain beneficial insects like more than other plants. So it's good to keep in mind. All right, so we found that some configurations of companion plants can increase syrphid fly visitation to peppers, but is that increase in visitation actually resulting in more pollination, and are we getting more peppers from it? So we did find that uncovered peppers yielded more fruit, which indicates a role for pollinators than the pepper plants that were covered with that mesh. But we didn't find evidence that this relationship between pepper production and pollinators had anything to do with the companion plants. And we also didn't find evidence that syrphid flies were the pollinators responsible for this. Overall, in the study, we actually didn't see a lot of syrphid flies. They're pretty elusive and small, and our methods of sampling, where we were just, watching the plants, that wasn't a great way to capture insect activity. But we did see other pollinators. For example, we saw a lot of these little metallic sweat bees on pepper flowers that were likely contributing to that increase in pepper production on those uncovered plants. So the next question for this project was whether companion plants could increase syrphid fly pest control services by the larvae on pepper plants. We'll take a water break. Okay, so to ask this question, we conducted a really similar experimental design, but in the summer of 2023, we made a few changes. We used just sweet alyssum and buckwheat. For some reason, sun hemp just wasn't germinating that year, so we just used those 2 companion plants. And then we also added a treatment where we put 100 green peach aphids on half of the pepper plants in the experiment. And we did that so that we could monitor how these aphid pests changed over time when they were surrounded by the different companion plant treatments. So we used green peach aphids, which are a common vegetable pest and a vector of multiple plant diseases. So they were a great pest to use for this. And we recorded their population numbers over time for about a month to see if there was any kind of pest suppression happening between those different treatments. And we did the same sampling that we had the previous year. And we found that pepper plants that were surrounded by companion plants actually had lower aphid abundance than pepper plants that didn't have any companion plants around them. So that tells us that companion plants were helping in pest suppression, which is great. Both buckwheat and sweet alyssum seem to contribute to aphid pest suppression. Sweet alyssum seemed just a little bit better than buckwheat at it. But again, there was no evidence that syrphid flies were the predator or the natural enemy responsible for the reduction in those aphid population numbers. We didn't see a lot of syrphid fly larvae, so there's a good chance that they weren't even there on our plants. They're also just like teeny tiny and kind of hard to find, so. But it's likely that another natural enemy of aphids, like lady beetles, was responsible for reducing their populations on the pepper plants that were surrounded by companion plants. Okay, so just a quick summary. We found that companion plants can increase syrphid fly visitation to pepper plants, and specifically companion plant identity and diversity are important when you're trying to create these plantings to attract beneficial insects. So syrphid flies seem to like diverse plantings that had all 3 species of companion plant, and they also really seem to like buckwheat. We didn't find an effect of companion plants on pepper yield, but uncovered peppers yielded more fruit, which indicated a role for pollinators. and there's no evidence that syrphid flies were the pollinators responsible for this. We think it was likely these cool little metallic sweat bees, because we just saw them visiting the pepper flowers the most frequently. And then for our syrphid fly pest control ecosystem service study, we found that aphid abundance was actually lower in the presence of companion plants. So companion plants were working in reducing those pest populations. But we didn't find any evidence that syrphid flies, these larval syrphid flies, were the predator responsible for that. I've got this picture here of a syrphid fly eating an aphid. Um, I think we only saw about 5 of these over the course of the entire study. So they just really weren't that abundant, or we weren't looking hard enough. But it's likely that other natural enemies, like lady beetles, were eating the aphids. And we also saw a lot of lacewings. So the photo on top here is an adult lacewing, and the photo on the bottom is a larval lacewing. And they're often called aphid lions because they eat so many aphids. And we saw a good amount of those on our plants too. So they could be contributing to pest suppression on the peppers. Okay, so after 2 years of this research, I really wasn't getting any conclusive results. I was learning that companion plants were working and attracting beneficial insects to peppers. Um, but besides that, I wasn't really capturing syrphid fly activity, and I knew I needed to make some changes or kind of completely change my project. So from this, I learned that syrphid flies are difficult to study, which makes sense why they're understudied. They're small, they're really fast, they're hard to observe just visually by just standing and watching plants. Um, and something that I kind of was thinking about after the fact is that uh, where I was conducting this research was on this big farm landscape. So this is a Google Maps screenshot of South Farm where I conduct this research. This is where my pepper plot was, pretty small, you know. And right next to it was the sunflower field that was blooming both years we were conducting our observations. So it's likely that insect pollinators, natural enemies, were visiting the sunflower field or other flowering plants at South Farm and not going over to our like tiny little potted plants as much. So I think there was maybe some competition there. So fortunately, I received funding from SARE, which is the Sustainable Agriculture Research Education Grant. Um, Late last year, I think I found out I received funding, which was awesome, to just totally expand this project. Um, I wanted to know what was really happening with the companion plants and with the pepper plants, and what beneficial insects, syrphids and otherwise, were responsible for pollination and pest control on peppers. And so, with the help of SARE funding and 5 undergraduate students, we spent all summer making this project happen. So we built a 19,000 square foot fence at South Farm, further away from the sunflower plot. Um, and inside of it were 200, or I should say are, this is still up. You can go see it at South Farm if you're nearby. There are 280 mini bell pepper plants in that fence. And surrounding them are different configurations of those 3 companion plants, sun hemp, buckwheat, and sweet alyssum. And unlike our previous years of research, these plants are actually planted in ground. So we grew all of the peppers from seed, planted them in the ground, and then I hand broadcasted all of the companion plants. So this is actually way more applicable to like a real farm scenario, um, which I think just makes it better research in general. Okay, so this year, we're still doing those timed visual observations of the peppers and the companion plants, where we're standing in front of them for, 3 minutes and recording any insect activity we see. And we're also still doing that netted pollination experiment to try to understand how companion plants affect or fruit production. And then we're also doing the aphid presence absence treatment to try to track pest control. But um, in addition to that, we're using trail cameras to monitor insect activity. So that photo on the right, it's kind of hard to tell, but that field camera is 3 feet away from a pepper flower. And we've been using them to just monitor insect activity. They're on the highest sensitivity setting, so any kind of movement triggers the camera. And I'm really hoping that this can supplement the number of insect observations that we have to our plants. Um, Already this year, I've seen way more insects than I had ever seen on our little tiny, potted pepper plants. So I think it's been really successful so far. Um, like I said, I'm still doing this research. We actually just sampled on Friday, and we probably will again tomorrow. So I don't have any real results, but I've got some ideas about what might be going on and some preliminary results. So far, within the last 3 months, we've produced 400 pounds, probably closer to 500 now. I haven't put all the data in, of mini bell peppers. Um, this has been so great and also so overwhelming because we spend most of our time harvesting and weighing them. Um, but yeah, we've produced a ton of peppers, and most of them have been donated to local food pantries. I've been giving a lot out. If you live in Columbia and you want to shoot me an email later, I can get you set up with some mini bell peppers if you're interested in them. They're very good. And like last year, it seems like those little tiny metallic sweat bees are our main pepper pollinator, which is really cool. I actually haven't seen a lot of syrphid flies visiting the pepper flowers proper. I see them like hanging out on the leaves and on the companion plants, but not going to the pepper flowers. And then also in previous years, we've seen a lot of lady beetles as our like primary natural enemy of insect pests. And it seems like this year the same thing is happening. On the right, I have a picture of a teeny tiny little lady beetle larvae. I think it's a first instar, so it's super tiny. It's probably just hanging out waiting for an aphid. And then, same as previous years, it seems like buckwheat is the most attractive to beneficial insects. We've seen everything from monarchs to beetles to wasps, flies, bees, pretty much any insect I've seen feeding on the buckwheat flowers, which is really cool. These are all photos that I took of insects that I saw on buckwheat. And I think this is really interesting because of the three plants, the buckwheat is by far the stinkiest. When it's flowering, it smells like kind of like compost, like a rotting compost kind of thing. Whereas the sweet alyssum and the sun hemp have this really nice like honey smell. And they don't get nearly as many insect visitors to their flowers. So I find that to be very interesting. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about how you can live a more insect-friendly life and like what you can do in your own yard to kind of create some habitat for beneficial insects. Um, Number one is planting native and planting diverse. Um, as you know, our ecosystems continue to be degraded, really our yards are the last hope to save insects and other wildlife and create some habitat for them, which is sad, but it's something that we can do, right? Um, so I definitely suggest planting native. Try to get your plants from a local nursery. Getting native plants from somewhere like California per se, um, those plants aren't as well adapted to our local ecosystem. It might not do as well and might flower at earlier or later times. So it's best to get local native plants. Um, and if you live in Colombia, there is a program through the Office of Sustainability called Como Wild Yards, and they can help you with kind of getting native plants established in your yard or providing guidance for making your yard more insect friendly. And if you already have a kind of cool native yard, they also give like little awards to folks who have like really great habitat going on. If you're interested in that, you can scan that QR code or just look up Como Wild Yards. And since fall is coming and there's leaves falling right now, I wanted to remind folks that if possible, to leave the leaves in their yard. Um, there are a lot of really great beneficial insects that nest in leaf litter and also in, fallen logs and rocks and decaying wood. And so if you're picking that up and throwing it away, you're killing these great insects. So Luna moths are an insect that I think a lot about. They pupate or overwinter in leaf litter. So if you're throwing your leaves away, you're just throwing Luna moths away. You don't want to do that. You want those in your yard. So if you have to move things around, I would suggest just kind of pushing them in a pile, but not tossing them. There are also really cool bees that nest in old flower heads and stems and old wood. So anything that you can leave, leave it. The last thing is, you know, we're often tempted to use pesticides or mosquito foggers or things like that for the pesky insects in our life. But those things rarely are effective and often harm beneficial insects. They're broad spectrum, which means that they kill a lot of different types of insects and they're not watching out for beneficials. If you have a bad mosquito problem, I would suggest mitigating any kind of standing water in your yard. I'm sure a lot of folks here have bird baths. That's great. Just try to, change the water every few days if possible. And it really helps if you and your neighbors are avoiding just still water, because insects like mosquitoes, they lay their eggs in water, in standing water. So if you could even get like a bubbler or a water agitator, that would help a whole lot. Um, yeah, I think that's it. I want to acknowledge everyone, all of my lab mates, and all of the helpful undergraduate students I've had work with me. I could not do any of this research without them. And now I'll take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. That was excellent. And I was gonna ask you about trail cams. I was like, don't they have trail cams for those? And maybe they can catch some nocturnal pollinators. But that was really interesting. Really good research. There were a few Q&A questions that came in there, and then a few good comments that everybody can check out there, like the alternatives to there's a mosquito bucket challenge, which uses a kind of a non-toxic formula there that works really well. And then check out Deep Roots, of course, and then also there's the homegrown national parks in general, something good to check out.
Yeah.
So yeah, are you able to access those Q&As and you want to take a
I think I can see them. Yeah, let me see here.
awesome that we weren't too overwhelmed with them, so I thought we might be able to.
Oh, okay. We have a question about lantern flies.
Oh my
Um,
goodness, I was just in DC and they were everywhere.
oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know too much about lanternflies. We actually have a really awesome extension specialist named Emily Altoff who works in my department who focuses on that, and she's more on like the public facing side of, insects. So I am not going to speak to that because I don't want to say anything incorrect. Sorry.
They're never gonna get here. Just say
Yeah, I don't want to like
it.
cause any alarm or give any misinformation. Oh, okay. Teresa brought up an interesting point about the billions of dollars that ecosystem services that insects provide make us. Um, but she's wondering how much we spend on pesticides. And I think about that a lot. Like, if we weren't using so many pesticides, we might have more beneficial insects and more ecosystem services. But who knows?
Those are very difficult questions to get at. Right
Yeah.
now, it's really difficult to get at quantifying, the whole host of chemistry that's out there in the pesticide world, whether it's herbicides or not, fungicides. But it's an extraordinary amount across our landscape. So, looking at the tonnage per acre across the Midwest. I can't even begin to quantify, but it's a lot of money spent. Good question.
Yes. Okay. Becky asked about how far apart were my different companion plant treatments. And they've always been 10 feet apart. So that was just what, we only have so much space. That was like the furthest apart we felt we could put them without taking up too much space, but where they weren't really affecting each other. So, does the nutrient makeup of some plant nectar make them more valuable to pollinators? Any ideas about why buckwheat was appealing? Teresa, I would say yes. I think different flowering plants have different nutrient makeups and are kind of have evolved for specific insect pollinators. I think buckwheat was so appealing because it has these tiny little flowers that are really easy for insects to access. So insects with different kinds of mouth parts can just get in there and get the pollen and the nectar. They're also really showy. They have these huge, beautiful blooms that are kind of constantly blooming from summer to we have some blooming right now, like fall. Um, and I think the stinkiness kind of attracts insects too. I don't know what it is about that smell, but they seem to like it. And Roseanne asked about what prevalence I saw of Asian beetles versus native lady beetles. And that's a really good question. I actually think I mostly see native lady beetles on my plants. Um, I don't know why that is because I see Asian lady beetles a lot, but not on my plots. So, yeah, that wasn't a full answer, but that's what I got. Okay. Thank you everyone for the questions.
I guess that was all of them then. Oh, look who's back. Just in the nick of time to say thank you. I think we just went through all the Q&As and just the comments. Well, that was really great. We wish you luck with further research because they're so important and overlooked, these invertebrates, and they're so fascinating. Maybe you can come back on sometime. We can just do a slideshow of all the cool invertebrates.
I
You've
would love that.
seen
Maybe
it.
I'll have some results from my current research too. Thank you for having me.
It's got to be a challenging thing to work in. Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.